Well, I hate to be the one to break it to you, but Steve is never getting banned in Smash Ultimate. But let me tell you why. If you're a part of the competitive Smash scene, or if you're even just adjacent to it, you're probably at least somewhat familiar with the Steve ban discourse. Basically, if you're not familiar, this is character Steve from Minecraft and Smash Ultimate. He's really, really good. He's pretty by and far the best character in the game, and there's a lot of discourse on whether or not he should be banned or he should be allowed at tournaments, right? And that's all you really need to know. But I'm going to tell you why this conversation doesn't really matter, because he's never going to get banned anyways, all right? Number one, Steve really isn't all that broken. Like, don't get me wrong, right? The character's good, and the character is for sure the best character in the game. But when we look at other characters that were close to getting the ban hammer in other Smash games, the dominance of Steve isn't really comparable. Now, I know what you're thinking, Greg. The number one player in the world is a Steve main, right? And no one had ever heard of him until he started playing Steve, right? And you're right to an extent, but if we look at the number one in the world, we see that he does play Steve, but where are the other Steves at the top level? Well, I'm sure there's a lot of really, really good ones like Onin and Didi, and those are the only ones I can name off rip. But there's a lot of good Steve players, right? And there's a lot of Steve players everywhere at a regional and local level, right? But the thing is that Steve really isn't carrying them to the point where Steve is over-centralizing the meta, right? And a lot of the times when we see characters that get banned, they get banned because they are oversaturated and they are taking over tournaments at a major level, regional level, local level. They're just everywhere. You can't find a top 8 that doesn't have like half of it being Steve's. When we get to that point, maybe the discussion for Steve being banned, I can see it being tipped in the favor of him being banned more. But as it stands right now, Steve just isn't really over-centralizing enough to really get people to want to ban him like that. All right, the second reason why Steve will never get banned: the top players don't want him banned. Now, a lot of players like Light and Zama, they carry the same sentiment that they want to dethrone Akala as number one while he's playing Steve, because they feel like him getting dethroned from number one by having Steve banned is a bit of a cop-out, which is true. I mean, like, it wouldn't feel the same being number one because he can't play his best character anymore than it would be if you like overcame and beat him. But it's not just the top players in the NA either. Japan, for example, which is one of the biggest regions for Smash in the world and is arguably the best region for Smash in the world, they are extremely bent on keeping Steve unbanned. They believe that the character is really good, but they're very passionate about the game, probably way more passionate than people here in NA, and they're more down to live out counterplay and figure out how to beat Akala rather than trying to rally up enough people to get his character banned. I think when it comes to top players as well, they just are more likely to really stick it out. I think like their competitive spirit really pushes them to want to overcome people in the most fair way possible. I think it's maybe like an ego thing as well. Like they just really want to be able to beat these Steve players when they're at their best, and they want it to be a completely fair playing field in terms of your character choice. But the top players all wanting Steve to be around kind of blends into my third point, which is Steve isn't completely killing the game. Here's the reason why there's such a big Steve ban discourse in the first place, right? When we look at majors are as big as ever. Like I've said a billion times before, there's a major every single weekend and they double schedule them. So there's like 3 majors every single week across the world. It's absolutely insane, right? There's no shortage of Smash being played. Smash is not on any sort of decline. If anything, Smash is on an upwards trend exponentially. Like, it's absurd how many tournaments there are every single weekend, right? But the reason why Steve is in such contention for being banned is because Steve is killing the game at a local level, right? So at majors, it's not all that bad, but at locals and at regionals, where all the Steve players are around and it's much more populated by players that are less passionate or players that are just less interested in actually learning how to play the matchup, Steve is pretty much ruining the game for them, right? And because that is such a large portion of people, those people are basically driving the Steve ban narrative all on their own, right? But when you put those people who individually don't have all that much push and sway within the community, and you pit them against the top players and TOs and entire regions that don't want Steve banned, it ends up evening out where the majority of people, because the local and the regional scene make up the majority of the Smash scene, want Steve banned, But the people who have the most influence and have the most power to actually enact the ban don't want Steve banned. So it basically creates this big push-pull situation, right? Where until they can convince the top players and the TOs and people that are really in power that they want Steve banned, there's just gonna be this infinite impasse where Steve is just gonna be allowed to compete everywhere else. And we've seen regions ban Steve. For example, my home region of Georgia banned Steve for a little bit, but then they unbanned him before MomoCon, and I think he's unbanned now. I don't really know. Even some TOs have banned Steve. Like, I talked with Cag at MomoCon about it. He hates Steve. He's banning Steve at Rise and Grind. Max Ketchum got Steve banned at LMM. But a lot of other tournament organizers, tournaments just don't have Steve banned. And a lot of the biggest ones, right? Genesis didn't have Steve banned. SmashCon didn't have Steve banned. Uma Burrows not getting Steve banned. These are all like the 3 P-tier events. Like, these are some of the biggest events of the year that Steve is going to be permitted at. So, but anyways, that's why Steve isn't gonna be banned. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you think I'm wrong, if I'm stupid, maybe you think he's gonna be banned. And then just also let me know in the comments why you think Steve should be banned or why you think he should stay. Let's start a little discourse about that, man. I'm interested to see what you guys have to say. But anyways, you guys have a wonderful day, man. Peace.